Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of the PM Learning Series. This is actually going to be the year-end special episode to close out the year of 2023. So thank you so much for joining us and supporting us this year. My name is Shavi. I am the host for the show and a product lead at LinkedIn. Please drop in the chat where you're joining us from, and really excited to have you here today. So the PM Learning Series is a series of live streaming events where industry thought leaders and practitioners share their PM career journeys, as well as lessons learned to inspire current and aspiring PMs like you to level up your product career. Make sure you subscribe to our newsletter, which you can find the link in the event details tab to receive a recap of key takeaways from today's event, as well as future event updates. Without further ado, let me bring to the stream a special guest from today. Hey, PJ, thanks for joining us. It's really honored to have you here.
Good morning. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, so folks, please drop in the chat where you're joining us from. Sometimes it takes a little bit to warm up, but we're excited to meet you and see you today. So PJ serves as the Chief Product Officer at Thumbtack, supporting the design, analytics, and product management function. PJ has a track record of scaling product development organizations while delivering software to consumers and small businesses across the globe. Prior to joining Thumbtack, PJ serves in numerous leadership positions at Meta. Over the course of PJ's career, he has developed an expertise in marketplaces, payments and financial services, business and consumer messaging, and e-commerce applications. Really, very diverse experience, PJ, driving economic empowerment by connecting professional merchants, casual sellers, service providers, and creators with consumer audiences. Prior to your work at Meta, PJ, you held a number of business development, strategy, and biz ops roles at PayPal and other consumer technology firms, as well as consulting firms in Silicon Valley. Thank you so much again for joining us today, PJ.
Thanks for having me. Excited to be here.
Thank you. Again, folks, please drop in the chat where you're joining us from. It's always really good to know, who's joining us on a Friday. Usually we see a pretty global audience. So really excited to close the year with many of you. So PJ, I think
Ecuador, Dubai, this is amazing. Canada,
Thank you.
All over the US. This is great. Good morning, everybody.
Yeah. Sometimes we get a couple folks from Asia, a lot of folks from Europe, and some from Africa as well. So it's really amazing. I think people are warming up today, so we'll hopefully more comments and intros will trickle in. PJ, I think so. We see in sort of the resume side of your story. One thing I did notice is that how much your work overlaps with creating this economic empowerment for small businesses across different spectrums, right? For your work at Thumbtack, Meta, and PayPal. Tell us a little bit about your journey into product management and sort of some of the personal reflections and learnings, throughout the way, and especially for those who wanted to become a PM or wanted to grow as a PM leader with this mission and purpose in mind. Tell us more.
Yeah, you hit it. You found the common thread, which is I've spent the better part of my career building tools to connect consumers and small businesses. And I've always found a passion in helping entrepreneurs, helping independent business owners sort of level the playing fields against sort of the big incumbents and compete on their service to the end user, not on size and scale. And I'm a big believer that technology can empower people to build a better life for themselves and better serve their customers. And so that's been a big push for me throughout my career. And that's given me very much sort of a commercial mindset as I build products. I really think about how do we unblock economic activity and how can software sort of provide that utility for people. And I ended up in PM. I joke that I'm probably one of the most reluctant product managers to ever do this job. For many, many years, I viewed myself as sort of a business side leader, and I really wanted to just solve problems to scale businesses. And I bounced around to a bunch of different sort of biz ops roles and finance roles and analytics roles. And I always viewed product managers as these like incredibly technical people. They were sort of unicorns in my mind. They either were futurists dreaming up crazy out of the blue solutions, or they're going super deep on the technical kernels of what was being built. And it didn't resonate with me. And it took me so many years to realize that there's so many different archetypes of product managers. If you just want to prioritize solving customer problems, removing friction, creating value in the world, then you can jump into being a product manager. And in many cases, in at least Silicon Valley tech companies where I've spent most of my time, the product manager role is the closest thing to a general manager role prior to getting to the C-suite. And it's the role where you get to actually bring together all the assets of a company, from the analytics side to the engineering side, to the design side, and really put end-to-end solutions together. So anyone in the audience who's sort of on the business side and reluctant to make the leap over, you're playing with the idea. I made the jump over, and you don't have to be a magical unicorn. You just have to want to solve problems, and you have to have an appetite for being very cross-functional and learning just enough about every discipline to begin.
Yeah, I love that. I think so much of your story resonated with my experience as well, being on the business side, initially reluctant to make the move because I wasn't technical. I had this self-doubt of like, would I make it? But I also like your point about different type of archetype, right? Like in the general management, the connective tissue nature of product management. You have to do whatever it takes to kind of, make your product successful. And I do want to say hi to a couple more folks from Algeria, Selmi, Chicago, Utah, Dallas. I know there's over 100 of you on the stream, so don't be shy. Introduce yourself, drop in the chat where you're joining us from, and any question you might have for PJ. So PJ, we have a very important topic today. Which is one of the most important things that a PM needs to do around decision-making, driving the right execution rigor. So you are known for building strong, diverse, creative, execution-oriented product development team. And, it speaks to what you were saying earlier about being this general manager role, right? Try to bringing everybody together. Tell us more about the execution rigor framework that you built. If you have an example story to bring that to light, that would be perfect.
Sure. There's a lot to be said about elegant, thoughtful strategies in leadership, and there's hundreds of books and podcasts and ways to learn about that, and it's super important in leading any large organization. But one of the things I feel is not talked about enough, people just sort of take it for granted, is once you have all that, how do you get stuff done? And it's very easy to assume once we sort of explain the strategy, everyone will just sort of automatically self-organize. And in contrast, the difference between doing it organically and doing it really thoughtfully can be a massive step function change in what you can deliver. I'm a big believer that most strategies you're right will be wrong. And you need to just learn by doing, and you have to have a general North Star, but you're gonna kind of tack your way there. I think about a sailboat, and you're trying to go due north, but the wind is coming due north. You can point directly at your outcome and get it really perfectly lined up, but you're not going to go anywhere. And I'd much rather sort of go northeast, learn a little bit, tack, go northwest, learn a bit, and you'll eventually end up at your destination. And I care more about moving fast than being perfectly aligned with the end goal, because at the end of the day, you're going to end up changing the definition of success as you go. And over the last 15 years or so, I've had the opportunity to work in a bunch of different companies, and even within a large company, work in a bunch of different divisions, and cobble together this patchwork of tactics and approaches and philosophies that make the difference between a well-oiled team and one that's sort of executing in a more clunky way. I like to say this is the process of building the machine that builds the machine. And just a small anecdote, Thumbtack has an amazing mission, a very dedicated and talented set of team members building against that mission and that strategy. And when I joined, I realized some of the execution was much more organic. And so I had the opportunity to roll out this framework. And it was just amazing to see the reception of the team. The team was hungry to run faster, and they had these almost artificial imagined blockers that were keeping them from running really fast and achieving the end goal a lot faster and skipping a lot of the red tape or process. And when we were able to unlock the potential of the team through some of these tactics, we saw amazing results. We started shipping products 50% faster in terms of more experiments, more code being written. But more importantly than the inputs was the outputs. We saw a doubling of the output of the team in terms of business impact for our end customers and professional services providers. And so it's just really rewarding to see the team sort of come out to their full potential by rolling this out. And it's not rocket science. It's just some basic blocking and tackling that requires somebody to sort of get everyone aligned on how we're going to do things in a really efficient way. So it's a very simple set of steps. Anyone within a product organization can implement these things. You don't have to be the CPO to put some of these things in place. And they can really unlock the potential of your team.
That's amazing. It's a great sales pitch, by the way. 50% more speed and double the output. So let's unpack. Right. Let's unpack the elements of your execution rigor framework, right? And I know Saurabh raised a pretty good question, but we'll come back to it once we have a chance to sort of learn the framework. So I know that the first element in the framework is the importance of clarity. How do you ensure everybody understand what's important? And also, PJ, how do you find the balance between trying a lot of different things versus having the right conviction? These are the 5 right bets that we're going to go after so that we maximize our learning, maximize, our return on investment versus just like, oh, let's just try a lot of things. Right.
Yeah. Awesome. To sort of give you the high level of the thinking here, this approach has sort of 3 principles, and they're expressed through 5 different steps in the product development cycle. We think about building product in 6-month cycles. There's sort of the planning phase, the execution phase, and then the sort of taking stock phase at the end, and then you rinse and repeat. And throughout that 6-month period, you go through these 5 steps. So to sort of explain the principles, the idea behind this execution rigor framework is to drive clarity, alignment, and urgency. So clarity is about having everybody be on the same page about what matters most and how we're going to get there at the highest level. What's the state of the world? What's the state of where we want to be? The second principle is alignment. How do we make sure that everyone on the team has the same priorities and goals? Make sure everyone's rowing in the same direction with the same pacing. And the third is about urgency. How do we create within the team this bias to action? How do you fight all the forces of swirling or overanalyzing or worrying about trade-offs or slowing down decision-making that get in the way of achieving your end goal? And I believe that you can build what I call minimum viable processes, MVPs, different definition of MVPs, which unlock the ability to get clarity, alignment, and urgency, and get out of the way for everything else. And so in doing, the 5 steps in the process we identify are: how do you build a roadmap that creates alignment from top to bottom? How do you set goals that keeps everybody on the same page? How do you run the rhythms of your business to keep everybody moving forward? How do you track progress? And then how do you reward success to really reinforce the behaviors and focus that you want the team to really strive for? And if you can bake those 3 principles into all the steps in your product development cycle, you can see massive acceleration.
That's amazing.
I can go into any one of those if you want to.
Yeah. Let's double click. But before then, I want to address a couple questions around, yes, the session will be recorded. So if you missed the first couple minutes, you can rewatch it. We'll also send out recap articles every Wednesday. So make sure you subscribe to our newsletter, including original writings from PJ about his framework and the 5 steps. You can find a link to subscribe to the newsletter on the event details tab. And I also want to say hi to a couple more folks, Trisha joining from India and Ian joining from London. So thank you so much. So PJ, let's maybe get started. You just mentioned a lot of good stuff, including defining the roadmap, setting goals and driving team alignment. Can you maybe talk a little bit about, best practices on how to do some of that?
Sure. Maybe we'll pick just a couple subsets, and you can share out the blog post where I go into detail on all of them. But one of the thoughts, one example of how to bring this to life is how do you create clarity and alignment in terms of what we're going to do? And I believe the road mapping step in the process is the first. It is the first step, and I believe it's the place where you get that clarity of what really matters and how we're going to approach it at the highest level. At Thumbtack, we step back and we try to imagine what's the best road mapping process for what we're trying to accomplish, and we did it from first principles. And as we put that together, one of the teammates actually said, "This sounds really familiar. I think there's an article written about this." And I found some other leaders from Airbnb actually had gone through the same sort of first principles derivation, come out to the same conclusions, and they coined the phrase W-shaped planning. And so I've adopted that as part of the framework. And W-shaped planning has this idea of marrying top-down context and prioritization with bottom-up content and really understanding of customer needs and the state of the product to come to the best conclusions. So you kind of march through this sort of W shape, and you imagine sort of time on the x-axis and the different roles from company leadership, group management, and working team on the y-axis. And it starts with sort of context going from top down. So what are we trying to accomplish? What is our high-level strategy? Then the W goes back up, and it says, based on that strategy and the state of the world and understanding of users, this is what each individual team or pod might recommend. Then there's the integration stage, where you go back down and sort of leaders say, all right, based on all this groundswell of great ideas that is aligned with the context, where do we want to prioritize? How do we want to synthesize these initiatives into bigger boulders as opposed to a lot of small rocks? And then there's the last leg of the W, you go back up, is sort of the readout stage, where once the consolidated roadmaps are put together, you broadcast them out to the entire org so that everyone really knows what everyone else is working on, and they can know what they can count on other teams, other departments to deliver over the next 6 months.
That's awesome. Let's talk about, once you created the clarity of like what you want people to, achieve as part of the roadmap exercise and goal setting, how do you make sure different teams are aligned on what needs to be done? Mm-hmm. And don't let things lost in translation, especially thinking about cross-functional partnership, people working in remote, right? Maybe there's different level of information. How do you trickle down and make sure people understand like what needs to be done?
Yeah. I think goal setting and very explicit goal mapping is a critical tool for understanding how each piece of the company fits together into the greater good. So at Thumbtack, we've been implementing this goal map, and we start with, where do we want to go as a company? And so we start at the absolute highest level, like definition of success at the company. And then we break it down into more and more granular layers. So it's sort of the branches of a tree. And at the nodes, at the bottom of that tree, you have individual teams that own their piece. And any team can see how does their piece and the delivery of their goals ladder up the tree to ultimately delivering the company's top level goals. And they can also look sideways and say, well, while I'm focused on this piece, what is this other team focused on? What is this other department focused on? How does their piece complement my piece? And it all kind of rolls up through the goal tree. Without this, you end up sort of, the analogy I like is 6-year-olds playing soccer. So the CEO puts out this grand goal. Everybody runs toward their interpretation of achieving that goal. And you end up, 6-year-olds playing soccer. Everybody's bunched up around the ball. Nobody's playing defense. Nobody's trying to get out in the open to line up a shot on goal. But through a goal tree, people within a pod can be clear that they're all focused on one set of goals that contribute to the larger outcomes. And everyone's playing their position. You don't bunch up. Sometimes someone has to work in our marketplace. Someone has to work on making the customer side experience better. Somebody has to work on making the pro side experience better. Somebody has to think about the back end matching algorithm. And how do those goals all come together to achieve the ultimate, company level goals for the end user?
Yeah, that makes sense. I do have one question from Surab. What do you think are some of the top challenges when it comes to, I guess, like driving clarity and driving alignment?
Yeah.
And then we will talk about urgency as the final piece of the framework.
Yeah. Well, I actually find it brings us, the question brings us to urgency. And when I think about the biggest challenge in the execution phase, after you've got your roadmaps, after you've got your goals, you move into execution, is how do you make sure you continue moving fast? That's about making decisions quickly. It's about having agency and removing blockers for yourself, not waiting for someone else to push you forward. And one of the tools we use for that is this sort of, we call it the minimum viable process, and it's a rhythms of business. So what are the set of discussions or the cadence of content that we share that drives us forward? A lot of companies have a lot of meetings for meeting's sake, or you end up in these sort of zombie meetings where someone had a great idea to set up a weekly meeting. They invited a bunch of people. It was useful for a period of time. And then the need kind of drifted away, and nobody really felt the need to, no one felt empowered to say, this is not a great use of time. We should cancel this meeting and get back to work. And so what we've done is we've defined the three things that have to happen every 1 to 2 weeks that make sure we move forward. The first is we have to share context. We have to know where we are and what's going on in the business and with the product. And so we have what we call business reviews, where we review the metrics, we review what's going on in the market, how our customers are reacting, and whether or not the things we're building are having the effect that we hope for, or whether or not we have to pivot as a result if they're not. The second thing we need to do to make sure we're moving fast is we have to make decisions quickly, and we can go deep on decision making. And so we have what's called a product review, which is a forum to go deep on one topic and make a decision on behalf of the team that weighs different trade-offs. So we can just make the decision, commit to it, and run full speed. And the third thing is we need to remove blockers. And so we have a rhythm called execution reviews, where we come together with the sole purpose of saying, what's preventing us from running full speed, and what do I need from my peers or my leadership team to unblock me? And what did I learn from execution failures of the past, so that I don't have myself or my peers don't trip over the same challenge? So if we keep having these technical issues, how do we prioritize building infrastructure to automate testing or something like that, to make sure that we're not stumbling over the same blockers over and over again? And we really ask ourselves, is there anything we need to do in terms of recurring meetings that don't solve one of those three needs: shared context, making decisions, or removing blockers? And we really try to clear the deck of all other sort of recurring meetings that just slow us down from moving forward.
Yeah, I want to double click on some of that stuff, and then we also have some good questions from the community. One thing is the last piece of the framework is about driving urgency. We want to move fast. You mentioned a couple of times everybody wanted to do that, but how do you balance moving fast but also thinking long term and making sure you're moving fast on the right path?
Yeah. When we think about setting goals, we think about both metrics goals and milestone goals. We think about short-term and long-term, and we define success cross-functionally. So, failure state that I often see is a team will set very explicit goals from like the product management mindset. So we want to move this metric from X to Y, and they don't explicitly say we want to validate certain hypotheses that won't move a metric this cycle, but by getting these learnings this cycle, it empowers us to move metrics a different set of metrics next cycle. So there's sort of learning goals. There's also, technical infrastructure goals. So very often PMs will set a set of goals, and the engineers will have to sit in the back of their mind thinking, well, I'll commit to these goals, but I've got to carve out 20% of my capacity to pay down technical debt or improve our technical infrastructure. And you have this misalignment where the PM is just focused on the product goals, and the engineers have multiple different goals to balance. And so I really push for a team. When I sort of define a team as one product manager, one eng manager, call it 8 to 12 engineers, a designer, a data scientist. They should all share one set of goals, and they should be near-term product goals, learning goals, technical infrastructure goals, design goals. If you need to improve the design quality of your products, so you don't accumulate design debt, just like you don't want to accumulate too much technical debt. And when you actually make all of that explicit and all the different disciplines commit to the broader set of goals, you can have this great balance of making sure you're delivering real immediate impact to end users, but also setting yourself up so you can deliver that impact in a sustainable way, cycle after cycle after cycle.
Definitely. And I think what you were saying earlier really resonated with the community around share context, product reviews to make decisions, and then execution reviews to remove blockers. I do want to double click since you mentioned about, sometimes Ange goals can be different from, product goals. We do have a couple questions around, I guess, driving clarity and alignment. So what happened if, let's say, Ange wants to build something different from what product wants to build? Like recently, for example, at work, I faced this problem of like product wants to do some quick experimentation to learn, what to do next. Whereas Ange might be more wanted to build a big platform, something a little bit more technically exciting and challenging, right? And then we have another question tangential to that, which is like, what if other teams' priorities are not aligned with my priorities? So, and who is responsible ultimately for setting the final goals? I think they all comes around, what if conflicts arise? Like, what is the guiding principle for thinking about driving that clarity and making sure people, I guess, disagree but commit to the same set of goals?
Yeah, I think there's two parts of that. One is in the upfront, let's align on strategy, roadmap, and goals. And then no matter how good a job you do with that, there's always the other part, which is now we're in the process of actually running forward. And we realize that there was more conflict or trade-offs within the goals or roadmaps than we wrote than we thought. And that inevitably happens. You're never going to have the perfect strategy. And so you have to have a framework for making decisions quickly and trading off different priorities as you execute. Because I find that's one of the biggest things that slows you down. People are too obsessed with their own individual team goals, and they're not thinking about the greater good, and they don't have the system in place to actually say, when should I relax one of my goals to make faster progress on a different goal or a different team's goal that ultimately makes us win together. And so that's where some of these decision-making frameworks come in, because it's when you wrestle with these trade-offs, and sometimes when you escalate, which is not a dirty word, by the way, it's when you actually bring to light the imperfections in your strategy and force the next level of thinking to make sure that you can iterate on the strategy and then run forward onto that new strategy.
Yeah, let's talk about the systems of decision making, because I think you refer to it a couple of times. And if for anybody who read James Clear's Atomic Habits knows that I think you don't rise to your goals, but you fall back to your system. Something along those lines of like, it's important to have that process in place. So tell us a little bit about framework that you use for structuring trade-offs, having that kind of conversation to say, hey, here's where the teams have to either step up or reprioritize their priorities to drive for the greater goods of the company.
Yeah, I see three pitfalls when in decision making that hold teams up. The first is teams don't know who's going to make the decision, and so there's no right or wrong here. You just have to be explicit. So you have to lay out in advance, before conflict comes up, what types of questions get answered at what types of levels. And every organization will have a different appetite. I love to empower teams to make as many decisions as possible at the team level. But there are certain guardrails or one-way doors that might trigger a decision sort of move higher in the company, where you can have maybe less content knowledge, but more shared context and understanding risk appetite, for example. So one is like not knowing who to decide. The second is that teams don't escalate. Teams view escalation as a dirty word. And instead of sort of going up a level to have more context, they kind of just keep swirling in circles, or even worse, butting heads with each other. And you erode trust and camaraderie, arm wrestling over decision where you could have just sort of said, hey, let's just like lay out our arguments. Let's get a neutral party that is accountable for both of our goals to sort of help us break the tie here, and then we'll commit to it and run forward. And the last pitfall is you don't run a tight process. And this drives me crazy. When you don't run a tight process, you waste a ton of time miscommunicating. You don't get to the heart of the decision. People don't feel heard, or they don't understand why a decision was made the way it was. And maybe the worst aspect is that people can't replicate the decision. If you don't understand why a decision was made, you can't take it as sort of case law or precedent and say, I understand the philosophy of the company and why we made this decision. I'm going to reapply it in a different context, in a different trade-off, so that we can run faster and not need to have sort of an escalation meeting. And so I've done some writing on how to run a really tight escalation process or a decision-making process. And I think there's 5 steps to create real clarity. The first is your problem statement. This is the hardest part of making a trade-off, is agree on the problem we're trying to solve. I find that 90% of the time, if you clarify the problem you're trying to solve or the decision you're trying to make, the answer becomes obvious. And so that's why it's sort of the first and most critical step. The second is to decide amongst yourselves, what are all the criteria that we care about in making this decision? And generally, how do you stack rank them? The third step is to explicitly lay out options. It is such a waste of time to have everybody imagine different solutions in their head and be debating, should we do this or should we do that, without clarity of what is the solution they're talking about. So take the time to enumerate the options and flesh them out so that everyone understands what options we're talking about. Step 4 is to assess the options against their criteria. So I propose using a matrix. So you have sort of, what are the options across the top and what are the things we care about across the side? And you color code every cell with red, yellow, green. You put in whatever data you have to support that option A is bad on criteria 3. And why is it red? And then everyone has an objective set of facts. So we can discuss the trade-offs, not the state of the world, not the facts of the case. And lastly, make recommendations, debate, and decide. Everyone who has a point of view on the decision should feel comfortable laying out, I prefer option A, and this other team prefers option B. And it's okay that we disagree. We have different contexts, we have different goals, we have different priorities, we have a different view on the world, and that's manifested as we have conflicting direction on this decision. And often that is a result of a gap in your strategy. And by explicitly saying team A thinks option A is better and team B thinks option B is better, you will surface a gap in your strategy. And then you can hold the decision maker accountable to saying which of these things is more important. What do we care about all these things, but what do we care the most?
Yeah, I like that because, in your framework, start with the problem statement, the criteria, the options. Sometimes I feel like teams debate about the option, but maybe it's because they weren't aligned in the problem statement to start with, or the gaps in the strategy, as you're alluding to. I know we are almost coming up.
Find, people say, well, I think about option A and I think about option B. And then by laying that out, they'll go, well, what if we think about a blend of the two? What if we take these parts from this option and this part from this option, put it together? And they go, wow, that's the perfect, peanut butter and jelly solution. Now, you don't want to get to consensus decision making, but often by laying out the problem and the options, the right answer becomes obvious, and it's often not what either team was sort of advocating for in the beginning.
Yeah, definitely. We're coming up on time, but we do have room for maybe 2 more questions from the audience that I wanted to round out. Todd earlier asked about a question around, I would reframe it as maybe still priority, misalignment across teams. So sometimes I find, for example, I'm sure, PJ, when you work at Meta, maybe before you become a chief product officer, because you have the oversight of a different part, but let's say you work in one org and you have some certain priority that depends on a different org. Your org is prioritizing this as the top priority, but not the other org. So you kind of have to depend on the other org to do something, or they have to see evidence from your org. So it's like this chicken and egg. Well, if you don't give me the support, how do it's not set myself up for success? Or sometimes it's product org needs dependence from marketing org, and you're not getting that resource from marketing because it's 2 different VPs. And how do you resolve that and ensure things move fast, or being scrappy and resourceful in light of limited resourcing?
Yeah. I think there's sort of 2 phases of addressing that issue. The first is in your upfront alignment. And you want to try to get as much alignment as you can at the beginning. And I believe shared goals is the way to do this. So if you have an engineering team in one department, an engineering team in a second department, and a marketing team, and all are required to make something happen, you want to decide up front, is this a priority or not? If it is, I need capacity from all three of these teams committed to this. And as much as possible, you want to sort of have those teams adopt a shared goal. And we all want this thing to happen. And therefore, I'm committed to doing this part, you're committing to that part, and so on. And you want to get that up front, and you want them to actually have those hard capacity trade-offs as part of the road mapping. If I prioritize this, I can't do this other thing. Let's debate that before the ink is dry on the roadmaps, not 1 month after we do road mapping, knock on their door and say, can you help me with that? And they're already 110% overcommitted. So it's really hard to do at that point. And then the other part of that answer is you're never going to get it right up front. And so you have to build social capital to be able to influence. I always tell my teams, you want to lead through influence, not through authority. Authority can be a shortcut to get things done, but every time you use authority, you are eroding the trust infrastructure in the company, and you're sort of taking cookies out of the cookie jar. You want to be putting cookies in the cookie jar in terms of building trust. And so, as opposed to saying, so-and-so VP said it's a priority, therefore I need you to do this or I'll go tattle on you. You want to influence, you want to explain the why behind your work. How does working on this project ladder up to our ultimate goals? How does it support our end users? How does it make their experience better? And you want to listen actively. What's the alternative project you're working on? Why does that one matter? Maybe your project is more important. Maybe I should, push my project out and I shouldn't just try to win. And in that back and forth of, I want you to understand what my priorities are, why, and I want to understand your priorities and why. You can often come to a lot of alignment through that sort of level of active listening and influence.
Yeah, I love the social capital aspect of like influence, not through authority. I wanted to also ask, you mentioned about sometimes we don't know what's gonna, we don't have all the information to make, like, we don't know what's the right path. So there's certain, ask for a leap of faith or having conviction around where to go. So what are some, in your decision-making framework in that 5 steps, if you have, how do you deal with ambiguity when you have limited
information? On the matrix that just has a big question mark in it. Yeah, you don't know. I think there's the type of decisions where the stakes are high and you really have to make the right decision. I find them incredibly, incredibly rare. It's only if you're going to burn up a bunch of company resources that you can't get back, or you're going to take a risk that you would not recover from, or you're going to make a brand impression that's off strategy that you can't sort of undo. There's just very, very few examples where that really happens. And so I often find that the cost of filling in the sort of unknown cell, replacing the question mark in your decision matrix with a data point, is often more expensive than just picking something and building it and learning from that iteration. And so one way to do that is as you enumerate options, you can say we have option A, which is build this. Option B, build that. Option C is spend more time deciding. Go off and do more data analysis, go do more research. Don't decide, and then come back in 3 or 4 weeks and try to make the decision then. And I always say, like, the no decision is make the no decision an explicit decision, because you can actually enumerate, if we decide option C, which is don't move forward, do more analysis, you're going to get guaranteed you're going to make no forward progress, and you're going to have cost. We're going to lose 3 weeks, 4 weeks, what have you. And so make the sort of do nothing and get more information an explicit option in the choice set, and explicitly lay out the cost of that decision. And I think what you'll often find is the cost of picking an option and being wrong and pivoting to the other option is less than the cost of getting more information.
Mm-hmm. I agree, because you want to analysis paralysis, in light of imperfect information. Thank you so much, PJ, for spending your valuable Friday morning with us and sharing your wisdom. I think the community have really enjoyed. And usually when we close our session, we love to ask a lightning round of questions to all of our speakers.
Great.
Are you ready for the challenge?
Let's do it.
All right, drum roll. So please answer in 60 seconds or less. First question, what's your most favorite product currently and why?
I have this little pill bottle cap that tells me how long it's been since I opened the bottle. And I keep waving it around as like this amazing example of an awesome product because it solves a very specific problem and it solves it the simplest possible way. No Bluetooth connection, no downloadable app, just no instructions or buttons. And so I strive for that level of simplicity in much more complicated environments. And I just keep waving that around as an example.
Yeah, I like that simplicity. Who would you say is the most influential product role model in your career?
I view relationships in the model of like role model, mentor, and sponsor, sort of the tip of the pyramid. I had the privilege of working with Deb Liu, who's now the CEO of Ancestry, for about a decade at Facebook and Meta, and she played all three roles for me: role model, mentor, and sponsor. And what I really respect about her is she puts all of her energy into building really impactful products that scale up. She's more steak than sizzle. So she's really focused on having an impact and less on perception or buzz.
Yeah, I like her. She was actually holding the year-end session last year in your spot, so on this show. So it's coming full circle. What's the final piece of advice? Or I know for resources, we will share your original article. And for those who are joining the session, please make sure you also subscribe to our newsletter, which you can find in the event details tab. We'll share the resources, recap the 5-step for decision-making, the 3, components of the execution framework from PJ. But aside from resources, what would be one parting advice that you would like to give for this community? For driving execution rigor, decision making, and maybe product career in general?
Yeah, I'll open it up a little bit. The market is shifting dramatically, and I think we as technology leaders need to re-anchor on what really matters. For the last decade plus, we've allowed to drift into our culture, at least here in Silicon Valley, and I'm sure it seeps into tech culture around the world, these vanity metrics of how big is my team and how many resources do I sort of control, or how many eyeballs do I have on this product? And we've lost sight of driving impact efficiently. So solving real user problems with the least amount of energy or investment possible. And I believe that the technology industry has really fundamentally shifted over the last year or two. And the faster leaders can reset their mindset to do what really matters for users and do it efficiently, and don't worry about number of eyeballs or team growth, and really focus on growth of the impact you're driving and the efficiency of your team. People that are able to make that shift in the things that they care about will be rewarded and will be able to drive more change in the world through their companies if they can make that shift. It's a new world.
Yeah, I think it's so important, PJ, because so much I recently learned, or maybe this year, one thing I reflected a lot on is the role of ego in our decision making and career progression, right? To your point, like, hey, vanity metrics such as how big the team size, who am I working with, my title, like all of that stuff sometimes overshadow the actual impact that you might be able to make. How do you go for a more nimble, agile team or whatnot? So I appreciate that you share that.
Focus on what really matters. All the other stuff will take care of itself.
Thank you so much. And I know it's been a very informative session. Our communities resonated with that as well. So thank you again for spending your time with us. Yes, Nikia, like all the replays of other interviews will be available. Just go to the event details tab. You'll see the link to subscribe to our newsletter. And with that, we actually close out quite a successful 2023. Thank you so much, PJ, as our year-end guest, and hope to see many of you in the new year. So stay tuned.
Thanks
Thank
for
you
having
so
me.
much
For all
again.
the comments and questions. Take care, everybody. Happy Friday.
Thank you. Happy Friday. Bye.